Pack your things, Clara. This bakery is my recipe now, and my lawyers will seize your remaining pennies. At 50 years old, my life consists of baking 40 loaves of rye bread a day using Agnia's legacy. Philip Bourne, a billionaire controlling 800 restaurants, filed a lawsuit demanding $15 million for copyright infringement. He wants to seize my oven to expand his multi-million-dollar brand. Little did Philip realize, his grandfather Thomas Bourne committed a state-level forgery in 1967 to steal those very recipes, and the original, unshredded state ledger is currently sitting on my kitchen table. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you. My fingers sink deep into the heavy rye dough, muscles straining under the weight of the mahogany-colored mass. Inside Agnia's hearth, the pre-dawn dampness clings to the whitewashed walls. Yeast and char dominate the small space, settling on my tongue. Outside, the October rain beats a relentless metallic rhythm against the tin windowsill, a sound echoing my own isolation. The push of my palms sends a dull ache shooting through my shoulders, a familiar companion representing 30 years of solitary labor. Agnia's absence occupies the room like a heavy, cold draft of past struggles. I roll the sticky mixture, pressing my weight into the wooden table, experiencing the resistance of the old oak. The dough resists, clinging to my skin before yielding. Constant pressure. Damp flour dusts my forearms, mixing with perspiration, creating a pale, sticky paste on my skin. Wiping my hands on my coarse gray linen apron, I approach the massive oven. The metal door screeches on its hinges, releasing a dry, blistering wave of heat. I slide a thick log of birch into the flames. The wood crackles immediately, resin bubbling and hissing, scrapes the rough bark. A sharp wooden splinter drives under my nail. I wince, pressing the injured thumb to my lips to taste the iron-rich droplet of blood mixed with charcoal dust. Minor injury, yet the sting sharpens my focus. The heavy clang of the iron door seals the warmth inside, leaving me to face the dim gray morning alone. Sudden white glare slices through the steam-fogged window, painting the wall with stark, shifting shadows. I freeze. Wet gravel crunches under heavy tires outside. A polished black sedan halts opposite Agnia's hearth and dies with a soft, pneumatic sigh. Only the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers disturbs the quiet, dragging sheets of water across the glass. Cold dread rises from my stomach. Quiet coastal town, visitors rarely arrive in luxury vehicles at 6 in the morning. I peer through the glass pane, observing the dark, unreadable silhouette inside the vehicle. The door swings open with a sharp click. A man in a tailored gray overcoat steps onto the wet asphalt. His leather Oxfords squeak sharply on the wet gravel before climbing the steps. A bell above my head rings, welcoming a gust of damp, salty air scented with decaying seaweed and diesel exhaust. The stranger crosses the threshold, leaving dark, watery footprints. Expression mimics carved granite, his eyes scanning my modest shop with clinical detachment. In his right hand, he carries a stiff leather briefcase secured with a gleaming brass clasp. There's a stray raindrop from his lapel with a slow, deliberate motion. Ignoring my silent, questioning gaze, the visitor snaps the brass lock of his briefcase. He retrieves a thick envelope. This is the yellow paper envelope on the flour-covered counter. It lands with a dry, muffled thud, clearing a clean patch in the white dust. His manicured fingers press the document. "Group," he announces. The low, flat voice strikes my ears like a physical blow. A chemical scent of fresh printer ink and heavy industrial adhesive replaces the comforting aroma of warm rye. He stands motionless for a moment, waiting for no response. The door closes behind him with the soft hiss of the pneumatic arm, leaving me alone in the sudden, heavy silence of my bakery. I approach the counter, my fingers trembling as I touch the rough edge of the paper envelope. Pulling the thick thread to unseal the packet, the stiff cardboard resists, scraping my skin. Inside lies a stack of heavy document pages bearing the watermark of Bourne Group. My eyes scan the lines. Infringement of proprietary formulas, Unlawful appropriation of trade secrets. Suit demands damages totaling 15 million. The letters blur into a chaotic mess. The sharp, acidic scent of processed wood pulp fills my nose, a sterile smell of corporate greed. Bourne demands my ruin, a calculated destruction of my life. This document legally erases my family history, forbidding me from baking Agnia's bread. It is an execution order. Legs weaken. I sink onto the wooden stool near the hearth, staring at the floorboards. The quiet in the bakery deepens, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the cooling iron stove. Into my apron pocket, my fingers wrap around my grandmother's old notebook. Its cover of cracked gray oilcloth bears permanent grease stains and flour smudges. I trace the corners. The yellowed pages rustle softly, releasing a faint scent of dried lavender, her signature preservation method. Philip Bourne wishes to declare these pages a cheap forgery. It's to turn her legacy into a crime, reducing her life's work to theft. I pull my heavy wool coat over my shoulders, ignoring the chill. The fabric carries the scent of damp wool and camphor. The bakery door with the heavy key, I step into the storm. The wind hurls a handful of icy drops against my face, carrying the bitter taste of salt and rotting leaves. I walk the pier. Wearing the yellow envelope beneath my coat to protect it from the deluge, the wet hem of my wool coat slaps my shins. My boots slip on the mud-slicked cobblestones as my breathing turns shallow. I struggle under the weight of the storm. Finally, I reach the small brick building bearing the faded sign, Paul Kotoff, Legal Services. Pushing the heavy oak door, the brass bell rings dully. The office smells of stale coffee, pipe tobacco, and decaying leather. A cast-iron radiator clinks and rumbles against the wall, fighting the persistent chill of the coastal rain. A stocky man sporting a silver beard sits behind a desk buried under folders. He rises, his heavy footsteps causing the floorboards to groan. He takes the damp envelope from my hands. Dry fingers rasp against the wet paper as he pulls the documents free. He motions for me to sit, his face darkening as he scans the first page. Paul settles his tortoiseshell glasses, spreads the legal pages on the green felt of his desk, smoothing the creased corners. I observe his calloused index finger tracing the lines of the accusation. Only his breath breaks the silence. As for his old rotary telephone, dialing the county registry with a series of sharp clicks. After a brief, quiet conversation, he slams the receiver down with a heavy plastic thud. "The situation appears dire, Clara," he mutters. Philip Bourne relies on an official patent registered by Thomas Bourne in 1967. Paul pulls a brass-rimmed magnifying glass from his drawer. It's on his desk lamp. The old metal shade hums, releasing a dry, hot scent of scorched dust. He presses the lens against the copy of Thomas Bourne's patent. I lean closer to the desk. It is cold and uneven under my palms, the lacquer worn away by years of nervous clients. Paul slowly glides the glass across the yellowed page. His pencil tip taps the paper with a click. It's to the upper right corner. "There is something wrong here," he whispers, his brow furrowing. Through the lens, an obscured ink stamp appears. Instead of the standard federal code, T-IND, the faded violet ink displays LIB-ARC. Paul removes the glass, setting it on the desk with a heavy clatter. "This represents an internal classification index," he explains. The municipal library used this code for its private archival collection. The very library where Agnia worked as an archivist in 1967. I scan the window, my mind racing. Somewhere, flooded basement archives, lies the key to our survival. The morning brings a suffocating quiet to Agnia's hearth. Yesterday's cinnamon buns, untouched, harden on the metal sheets. Sugar glaze displays a web of tiny fractures under the gray daylight. The brass bell above the entrance hangs silent. Frightened by the news of theft, my neighbors detour around my shop to the opposite side of the wet cobblestone street. I take a dry bun, snapping it in two. The sharp, splintering crack echoes through the empty room. Within, the crumb is dry, is lifeless. I toss the stale remnants into the metal bin, refusing to gaze at the empty glass display cases. My hands tremble slightly from the early, freezing morning cold. Along the muddy path leading to the municipal library. Water pools on the uneven flagstones, reflecting the weeping gray sky. Rainwater drenches my wool collar, sending cold trickles. The facade of the library is dark, stained with decades of damp soot. Heavy chains wrap around the oak doors, secured by a padlock. A thick layer of orange rust coats the metal links. It stands dead, a monument slated for demolition by the contractors of Bourne Group. I pull the chain. The links rattle with a heavy, leaden clank against the wood, warning me away. Patrols this forgotten corner of the harbor. I circle the building, my rubber boots sliding in the saturated grass, wet brambles snagging my coat hem. I locate the small side door. The frame has rotted from decades of rising dampness. I press my shoulder against the swollen timber, applying my entire weight. A sharp ache flares in my shoulders, blinding me. Dry, splintering crack, the wooden frame gives way. The rusted lock inside snaps, and the door creaks open. A wave of stagnant, icy air rushes out. I squeeze through the narrow opening. Splinters catch my coat as I close the door behind me. Dead silence fills the abandoned library, broken solely by the distant tapping of water on the tin roof. I stand in the dark. Corridors stretch into the darkness, lined with tables buried under gray plastic dust sheets. Water has pooled in the hollows of the plastic, forming cold, stagnant lakes. The air smells. Wet plaster, mice, and damp chalk. I slide my flashlight switch forward. The weak yellow beam cuts through the gloom, illuminating thick columns of dust floating in the stagnant air. The cold here is thicker, heavier than the rain outside, penetrating my wool coat within seconds and causing my teeth to chatter. My hand slides along the cold, slimy metal railing and the narrow stone steps leading to the basement. With every step, the masonry becomes wetter, concrete crumbling under my boots with a dry crunch. A heavy, marshy draft rises. Cold air forces my breath to emerge in white plumes. The flashlight beam wavers, dancing across rusted overhead pipes covered in thick droplets. My footsteps sound hollow in the deep. End of the subterranean corridor, the heavy iron door of the archive appears. A padlock hangs from the latch. I reach into my pocket for the ring of keys taken from the desk. Fingers, numb from the damp chill, fail me. The heavy key ring slips, hitting the concrete floor with a metallic clang. I drop to my knees, sweeping my hands through the cold grime. Open the dark until my fingers brush wet metal. I stand up, inserting the key into the lock. It resists, scraping against the dry internal tumblers before turning with a heavy click. The door. It swings open with a high-pitched shriek of ungreased hinges. The archive exhales a stagnant breath of old glue and mold. Steel shelves line the walls with gray boxes. Approach the section labeled 1967 and reach for a high shelf holding a heavy crate marked Personnel Files. The metal shelf groans under the shifting weight, and the box slides free. The container falls toward me. I leap aside. The box hits the floor with a heavy thud, exploding in a dense cloud of gray dust. I double over in a violent, hacking cough, catching my breath. Dust settles. I kneel among the scattered papers. The flashlight beam sweeps over yellowed folders until it stops on a thin, gray paper binder. It is Agnia Kotova's personnel file. The board has softened from the dampness, and the metal prongs have turned a flaky brown with rust. I touch the binder, my fingertips cautious. A sharp, acidic odor of decay rises. I slide my fingers under the rusted metal prong to open the folder. The brittle wire snaps, gouging my palm. I ignore the warm bead of blood smudging the gray cover. I read the first page. On the paper lies the official dismissal order dated June 1968. The blue ink stamp of the patent office has bled into a shapeless smear, but the text remains legible. It details her crime. Dismissed for systematic negligence, destruction of state property, and attempted theft of designs. The typed words pierce my thoughts like needles of ice. My chest tightens. Agnia guilty? Was my family's pride built on a foundation of lies? I rest my forehead against my knees, clutching the folder, my warm tears freezing on my cheeks in the dark cellar. I prepare to close the file when my fingers register an unusual thickness in the rear cardboard cover. I rub my thumb along the edge. The cardboard yields, indicating a hollow space within. My fingernails, I scrape at the glued seam of the binder. The old glue crumbles into gray powder, the paper layers tearing with a dry, rhythmic sound. A flat packet slides out. It is wrapped in yellowed wax paper. I unwrap the protective layers. The sticky paper clings to my fingers, leaving dark, oily residues. Inside lies a collection of old letters. Correspondence is secured with a thin, decaying hemp twine that crumbles at my touch. I retrieve the first letter. Thomas Bourne's handwriting has faded to a pale, watery brown. Aggressive, slanted script remains readable. I unfold the brittle page. The paper rustles like dry leaves, releasing a strong odor of rot and stagnant cellar water. I scan the lines. The letter is from December 1967. Thomas addresses Agnia with sickening flattery, begging for the formulas of her rye ferment, praising her genius. Toward the end, his tone shifts, becomes demanding and cold. Touching this paper, which holds the ink of his greed from 50 years ago, sends a shiver of disgust through my frozen bones. I open the final letter. Message dated May 1968. Thomas drops every pretense of affection. He writes to Agnia, "If you dare claim the patents, my father will ensure your dismissal for theft. No one will listen." He threatens to put her in an asylum, arranging her confinement within a week. Cold anger replaces my despair, warming my blood. The historical truth lies in my hands. Agnia was no thief, crushed by the grandfather of Philip Bourne. I fold the papers, securing the wax paper packet inside the inner pocket of my coat, close to my chest. I return to Paul's office, place the damp wax paper packet on the green felt of his desk. The attorney pulls his desk lamp closer. The metal shade hums softly, radiating a dry heat. Water drips from my coat hem, pools on the floorboards. Paul unfolds the damp layers, cautious with the fragile contents. A scent of old dampness and rot rises from the package, filling the narrow office. Up the first letter from Thomas Bourne. His eyes trace the faded script, and a grim satisfaction settles on his features. The rain beats against the glass pane. A fragile hope stirs. Center of the bundle, Paul extracts a folded sheet of heavy legal paper. The old fibers resist, cracking along the crease lines as he spreads it flat. Paul presses his palms, holds the edges. It is an unreleased draft agreement from 1968. Within, Thomas Bourne explicitly recognizes Agnia as the sole author of the rye sourdough ferment. He offers money, ends her silence. Thomas's grand signature sits at the bottom, marked by a thick ink blot. "This is our leverage, Clara," Paul whispers. His calloused finger traces the dry violet ink. This document, we can force Philip Bourne to withdraw his suit. He cannot risk the reputation of Bourne Group. Paul turns to his mechanical typewriter. A heavy metal Optima pulls a blank sheet into the rubber cylinder, secures the metal guide bar, and begins to strike the keys. The office fills with a metallic clatter and the sharp ring of the bell. Smells of carbon ribbon, machine oil, and hot iron. I sit nearby, gripping my empty mug, absorbing the heat from the radiator. It seems the rapid clatter of the keys is the sound. The noise is our enemy's legal wall crumbling under a barrage of truth. The morning brings freezing sleet in place of the harbor fog. I walk toward Agnia's hearth, holding my keys. Old metal presses against my palm, a comforting weight representing my daily work. I plan the morning routine, firing the oven, preparing the rye sponge. We will deliver the notice. And to meet Philip Bourne today. Sleet patters against my hood, and thin ice crunches under my boots. I turn the corner onto my street only to stop. 2 vehicles are parked outside. Blue lights cast shifting reflections on the wet brick walls of my shop. My pace quickens, my boots sliding on the wet cobblestones, but a court bailiff blocks the steps. A wide red ribbon stretches across the oak door, secured by a heavy lead seal over the keyhole. The air carries the scent of exhaust fumes and hot wax, melted on the porch with a torch. To push past the barrier, but the officer raises a gloved hand, stopping my progress. "This property is sealed by order of the court pending the litigation," he says flatly. Forward, my fingertips touching the cold metal of the padlock. The wet paper label, bearing a blue court stamp, disintegrates under my damp skin, leaving dark gray smudges. Heart beats in a slow, irregular rhythm. Through the door seams, I detect the ghost of my daily life, the smell of wood ash and dry yeast. My world sits locked inside as I stand outside, melts inside my collar, my hands growing numb against the iron. Paul runs up the steps, his chest heaving, his wool coat dark and heavy with wet sleet. He clutches new papers. "Bourne secured a preemptive injunction," he says, his breath rising in gray plumes. He claims we unlawfully obtained trade secrets from their corporate archives. He has blocked us. Stare at the red ribbon, watching the wet paper tear further under the cold wind. Paul guides me away from the steps, seeking shelter under the awning of a closed shop. He grabs my sleeve. "More, Clara," he whispers, scanning the street. "Bourne Group purchased the library building this morning. Officially, the structure is unstable. They have sent workers to clear it and to incinerate every record before we can present our evidence." I wrench my arm free, running toward the library, ignoring the pools of icy water. My boots splash through the mud. It stings my eyes. Paul follows, his heavy steps echoing behind me. As we reach the library square, a deep, rumbling roar of a diesel engine fills the air. The smell of exhaust clings, all settled on the wet birch branches. A yellow cargo container stands by the cellar entrance. Yellow hazard tape bearing the words "Danger Zone" blocks the cellar steps. Security guards in dark jackets with the Bourne Group logo stand at the door. I try to step over the tape, my fingers clutching the wet plastic strip, but a guard raises his hand. "Property, authorized personnel only," he barks. From the open door, a scent of burning paper and wet masonry dust rises into the sleet. Over his shoulder, I watch the workers, carrying gray cardboard boxes from the cellar. They toss them into the hopper of an industrial shredder mounted on a flatbed truck. The machine screeches, discharging pulp. Falls into the container. Fine paper dust floats in the air, settling on my eyelashes, leaving a dry, bitter taste on my tongue. With each turn of the blades, our proof turns to dust, and in the melting sleet, clutching my leather bag against my chest. Inside sits the sole surviving packet of letters, hidden beneath my coat. The wet sleet runs down my face with tears. The history is sealed, the archives are gone, and Philip Bourne has demonstrated the power of his wealth to rewrite history. Paul stands beside me, his head bowed, his shoulders sagging. The continues its relentless roar, and I experience a cold, heavy weight of defeat. In the quiet of Paul's office, I slowly unbutton my heavy wool coat. I reach inside my clothing. Beneath the damp fabric, I extract a heavy, canvas-wrapped volume, placing it on the desk with a solid thud. This is the original 1967 State Register of Inventions. I saved it. I managed to slip it from Agnia's old library locker before the security team sealed the cellar. The cracked leather cover is dark, its corners reinforced with rusted iron bands. Old metal leaves a reddish smear and a sharp metallic scent on my fingers. The book is icy to the touch, carrying the dampness of its hiding place. Paul gazes at the volume with reverence. A wide hand brushes a thick layer of gray dust from the cover. Paul opens the massive volume. Coarse, yellowed pages rustle, releasing a dry odor of old glue, coal soot, and dried ink. He slowly turns the heavy sheets, his fingers cautious on the fragile margins. He locates the entries for October 1967. The rows of handwritten script, penned in iron gall ink, fills the grid. Only Paul's heavy breathing and the dry rattle of the paper disturb the room. I lean forward, the yellow light of the desk lamp illuminating our faces. For us lies the unvarnished history Philip Bourne attempted to incinerate. 2 days later, Paul and I enter the state patent office. Unlike the decaying library, this structure is modern. It is a monument of polished steel and tinted glass. The interior smells of synthetic ozone, air conditioning, and fresh furniture polish. My leather boots click on the marble floor. He carries his old briefcase, housing the heavy register. A quiet, cold determination settles over me. We are not here for a chaotic courtroom battle. We have requested an urgent hearing. Present the case before the Committee on Patent Ethics, where documentary evidence dictates the outcome. Inside the sterile hearing room, Philip Bourne already occupies a seat. It's at the polished mahogany table, flanked by 3 corporate attorneys. Their tailored suits are pristine. The scent of expensive cologne, bitter espresso, and treated leather surrounds. The aroma fills the room. Their sleek, ultra-thin laptops and leather portfolios bearing the gold-embossed logo of Bourne Group sit on the table. Philip Bourne ignores my presence. Focus is directed to his gold fountain pen, which he spins lazily between his manicured fingers. His attorneys whisper, their voices absorbed by the soft hum of the ventilation. The chairperson, a stern woman in a gray jacket, declares the session open. Philip Bourne's lead counsel rises, placing a glossy folder on the table with a crisp, loud click. His statement, delivering a polished speech detailing the proprietary rights of Bourne Group and the legality of Thomas Bourne's 1967 patent. His voice is smooth and confident. Each is filled with statutory citations. Philip Bourne reclines in his leather chair, a portrait of supreme confidence. The attorney finishes his address, directing a gaze at Paul. Rises without a word. He dispenses with rhetorical grandstanding, opening the brass clasps of his briefcase with a sharp, metallic snap. He lifts the heavy 1967 register. This is the book directly in the center of the mahogany table. The massive volume lands with a deep, echoing thud, causing Philip Bourne's gold pen to skitter across the polished wood. Falls silent. Paul opens the volume, releasing the unmistakable dry dust of the library archive. The scent of decayed paper clenches the throats of the corporate attorneys. My smell clashes with their expensive cologne. The original State Register of Inventions, October 1967, Paul says, his voice flat and steady. His index finger points to the page, to entry number 412, dated October 12th. Beneath the technical drawings of the rye sourdough ferment sits a clean, elegant signature. Agnia Kotova. The ink has faded slightly. Are pale, but her careful handwriting remains clear. Paul slides the volume toward the chairperson. The woman settles her spectacles and leans over the page, tracing the ink. Bourne stops spinning his pen, his posture hardening. Now observe the patent attributed to Thomas Bourne, Paul continues, reversing the pages to a section from July 1967. To entry 301, bearing the date October 26th. The text is squeezed into the margins in a cramped hand, occupying a narrow space between existing July filings. The fraud is clear. The color of the ink differs from the surrounding entries, and the paper fiber shows chemical erosion from an eraser solution. The deception is undeniable. His lead counsel pales. His fingers tighten on his folder. The cooling fan of his laptop hums loudly in the silence. Paul produces a second document, a certified copy of a 1971 court judgment. It details the conviction of the registry's chief clerk of accepting bribes to falsify patent records. The clerk's signature sits directly beneath Thomas Bourne's marginal entry. As this forgery was committed within official state records, it constitutes a crime against the state, carrying no statute of limitations, Paul states. A dead silence descends. Is quiet. Philip Bourne's gold pen slips from his fingers, clattering against the table. His jaw tenses, a muscle twitching near his left eye. The chairperson removes her glasses, directs a cold stare at Philip Bourne. She signs the administrative order with a heavy scratch of her pen. The patent issued to Thomas Bourne is voided from its date of inception. Evidence is forwarded to the Prosecutor General for criminal proceedings regarding the falsification of state registries by Bourne Group, she announces. The lawyers pack up. These scramble to pack their laptops. Philip Bourne remains motionless, staring at Agnia's signature, the document responsible for dismantling his empire. We walk outside. I step onto the granite steps of the building. A brisk wind carries the clean scent of the sea, clearing the ozone from my lungs. The rain has stopped. Instead, snow falls. Large, silent snowflakes drift from the gray sky. The air is remarkably crisp. Paul closes his briefcase, directing a warm, tired gaze at me. He extends a hand. His palm is dry and warm. Grasps my hand. I squeeze his fingers, experiencing the immense weight of the past weeks dissolve into the cold air. I return to the door of Agnia's hearth. I rip the red paper ribbon, the paper from the door frame with a dry sound, tossing it into the bin. The lead seal falls with a heavy, metallic click. I turn the brass key in the lock. The mechanism yields, turns smoothly. Inside, the bakery is cool, smelling of flour and cold stone. I approach the oven, strike a match, and light the birch logs. The fire crackles with warm heat. To knead a fresh mass of rye dough in the oak trough, experiencing a quiet, sweet sorrow, and the final, ultimate triumph of cold, documentable justice.